Jason, I'm actually really excited to talk to you about Section 8 today because I consider you like the king of Section 8, understanding it. We've talked about it a lot. Now, you still rent to Section 8 housing, correct?
Right.
I have owners, I have people that say, I would never rent to Section 8. What do you say to that?
So for people that don't know what Section 8 is, it's basically government subsidized housing, and they reference the 8th section of the articles where government subsidy is being issued. And they're saying for people that meet the following criteria, maybe circumstance or bad things, they've lost a job, whatever, they qualify for funding from the government for housing. And they refer to that as the 8th section or Section 8 within that document. And so unfortunately, there's a bad stigma that people have created that, in my opinion, isn't reflective of the caliber of tenant that you're actually getting through that program. The stereotype is that if you're renting to a Section 8 tenant, this is someone that doesn't have a job, that might be a problematic person in general. They might have had different things on their record, crime history, things that maybe you wouldn't normally allow for when you're doing your screening for a tenant. Anyway, the list goes on of stereotypes that are negative associated with renting to somebody on that program, when in reality, if you look at it, more closely, it's almost the opposite of what you think as far as what the net effect is to the landlord. And so, you can tell me how much you want me to go down that path of like what that could or couldn't be, but in general, like that at least answers the question of I rent to Section 8 and this is kind of like what it is.
I've had people say, why would you rent to Section 8? The thing about it, I think there's a fear behind it, like you said, is there's a stigma.
As a landlord, there's certain main things that I look for when, regardless of like the application and all the other criteria that I might have, there's just kind of like a main few things that are important to me. Number one is, will I get the rent? Not who am I getting it from? I don't care who pays me the rent. Will I get the rent? If I get it, that checks a big box for me. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, will this person be a problem for me? Am I going to have to spend a lot of time resolving problems for them because they can't do that in exchange for collecting the rent, right? Am I babysitting something that I don't want to have to babysit in order to get the rent? So if I can check the box to get the rent and also check the box to say they are not a problem for me, they're independent enough that they can manage things the way the lease says and manage their relationship with neighbors the way society says on their own, where I don't have to be a part of that, those are two huge criteria for me.
Like during COVID-19, it was interesting. People that were on Section 8, those landlords still kept getting money, even people that weren't on Section 8. But if it's government money, you're guaranteed it.
Now, a third one that's not terribly distant is, will they take care of the place that they're in? And do I have any protection if they don't? So just talking about those three variables, right? The answers to those questions, right, are the main reasons why, despite what most people would think, Section 8 is actually the solution for me. Typically, like if I was just renting to you, one way I would determine, will Tiffany be able to pay the rent, is I ask you and I verify from you income, paychecks, longevity with the job, whatever. These tenants, I don't even care if they have a job, if the city of Mesa is paying all their rent. I don't need to audit the city of Mesa. If the city of Mesa runs out of money, there are bigger problems than what I'm measuring with this tenant status, right? I will always get the money from the city of Mesa. They don't need to send me pay stubs. I don't need to see history of them paying or not paying. They have the money, they will pay. So that checks the big box right off the bat. No other tenant will say, on top of keeping my deposit, if I leave early or if anything happens, I will pay you all the days that it takes to bridge that gap to the next person. And I'll also pay you for whatever it takes above and beyond my deposit to get it ready. You just don't have that. The Landlord-Tenant Act won't even allow for you to ask that of people, right? But through housing, since they propose it, you're not requiring it of them. They're just saying, if you participate, we will do this. Well, then you accept it.
If you're doing your checks and balances, like for instance, what we do, we not only get the caseworker, how have they been, but we also call the last 2 years landlord to verify. So if you're doing that on the Section 8 person or a regular person, you're going to still understand what kind of person you're putting in the home, but you have a little bit more security if you're willing to rent to Section 8. And actually, in some places, you can't deny just because it's Section 8 anymore.
Yeah.
Depending on the city, depending on the state, you cannot deny because of the money coming from Section 8. And I think that's very important for landlords to understand.
The other benefit, right, when you're dealing with a tenant is sometimes you do find yourself in court. You know, sometimes you'll get tenants that they like to kind of retaliate. They take it personal that you're getting or that you're evicting them for not paying rent, and then they start to sabotage things. And obviously they're not admitting that they're doing that, but they do stuff, right? And we had a tenant that they were actually on Section 8, and they had told us, we haven't been paying our portion of the rent for the past 5 months, and it was a nominal amount. But they kind of made the challenge of see what happens when you try to evict us. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what would happen. Obviously we're supposed to, and we're supposed to notify the caseworker. And I think the amount was only $500 total that it had built up to, but we gave them a 5-day notice. And that same evening we received a photograph from the tenant with a police and fire department report and a picture of her daughter's foot all wrapped up. And she said that she was going to be suing us, that her daughter's foot, they lived on the second floor, had gone through the floor because wood that had been damaged in the past from wood rot or being wet or whatever was so soft that her foot went totally permanently damaged, all these things, right? And obviously I had been forewarned, see what happens when you try to evict us. And that was the day that we gave the 5-day notice. But had that person not been on housing, think of the burden of proof I would have had to have provided whoever, right? Now, the courts or whoever, they could have totally been in the right as far as any judge is concerned. But in reality, because they had just moved in X months prior and they had an A to Z checklist from the city of Mesa from a professional city employee inspector say, nope, that soft spot was not there. And it's there because their washer is, because this is in the laundry room, has been leaking water, their fault, their problem, and they've not been mopping it up. They've let the water sit. Now, her foot didn't even actually go through. That was just the easiest spot that they could punch a hole through.
Yeah.
And then stage, because we learned later by investigating, because the city then pays for the investigation, right? I'm not doing anything, right? They're fighting. And so the net result ended up being everything was staged, right? It was complete fraud. They were completely kicked off the program, never to be reinstated again. And I was reimbursed everything. I didn't even have to hire an attorney. I didn't have to do absolutely anything. If that were not a Section 8 tenant, that could have been a lot of money defending just to find out that I won, but I don't get reimbursed all the money that I spent defending.
If you could say anything to landlords out there to help them understand that, give Section 8 a chance, or what would you say to someone that says, hey, I really don't want to rent to Section 8?
The stereotype or the reasons that people have created that are, this is why I would never rent to Section 8, when you actually go in with a microscope, right, or magnifying glass, you find it's actually the opposite.